This video is about politics and tourism, an unusual subject to a lot of people, but to me, this is the third time in my life that it's affected me. It affected me in 1977. I went to Israel, and a lot of people say you shouldn't go to Israel because of the way that the Israelis treat the Palestinians. And then in 1990, someone said, oh, why are you going to South Africa? The apartheid regime is being dismantled, but it's still functioning. You shouldn't go there. Now I read in my guidebook that Zimbabwe is also a target for tourists to receive. Why are you going there? You shouldn't be going there. You're going to prop up the regime. Robert Mugabe is running Zimbabwe, which offends a lot of liberal thinking people in the West. He's 92 years old. He must be the world's oldest full-time worker, certainly the world's oldest leader. He's been in power for 36 years. 29 of those has been as president, and about 36 years as prime minister and president. But after Margaret Thatcher in Britain said, I want to go on and on and on, the British people said, no, we don't want that. And Tony Blair learned that lesson because he resigned after about 10 years. David Cameron was going to resign in 2020 because he'd learnt that the British people get tired of seeing the same face on television frequently, and they're all controversial figures. Mugabe, the father of the nation, back in 1980 when he steered the country through independence, was a figure that you loved, but he didn't know when to let go of power. And he would rather be hated by 95% of the population and remain as president as opposed to relinquishing power like Nelson Mandela did when he was president for one term. And he left office revered. But Mugabe would rather have power and be hated. He stayed in power by reports telling us that he rigged elections. If there were 400 people in a small town voting, there will be about 3,000 voting papers added to make sure that nationally he won the competition. People would be intimidated. They would be threatened. They would be questioned by the police. The opposition in this country doesn't really have much of a voice. It doesn't get a lot of advert space. Their marches and demonstrations are banned or they're threatened with violence. And opposition figures over the decades have disappeared. Some have been murdered. Genocide has been mentioned. They've been caught in an accident such as a fire in their home. And Morgan Tsvangirai, who was sharing power with Mugabe around 2011, he just happened to be in a car crash. He was driving and his wife got killed, and it just happened that the vehicle they hit was an army vehicle. In the year 2000, all the white farmers lost their land. Many of them have left this country, and the economy has steadily declined to a disastrous level. The country is riddled with corruption. You have to get government permits to do anything, licenses, and you have to pay a lot of money which the government ministers pocket. And if you bring vehicles into the country, the price is 100% tax on top of the cost of the vehicle, matching the price of the vehicle. There are police road checks all over the country, and they are primarily designed to raise money. The police will go out of their way to fine you. If your fire extinguisher, which is mandatory, hasn't been serviced, you're going to have to pay a $10 fine. Then the police know what type of reflectors you should have, or if the handbrake's tight enough, or the tyre tread. And they manufacture ways of getting a fee out of you. There's a chronic cash shortage in this country because Zimbabwe is hardly producing anything, and it has to import virtually everything, and they have to pay in dollars, and they're using dollars at the moment. And to signify why they're using the American dollar, they actually had the Zimbabwe dollar, and it became useless. Here's a $50 billion bill, and there were $1 trillion bills. So Donald Trump, eat your heart out. You've got the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, and here you've got those famous stones where I showed you a video in Topos National Park. So that is $50 billion, which is now worthless. There have been demonstrations in this country in the last few days. All of them are suppressed. We're supposed to have a democracy in Zimbabwe, but there isn't one as we know it. It's a charade. People have been imprisoned, and outside the presidential palace, the Houses of Parliament in the city of Harare, in front of Unity Square, there were a police water cannon, there was police with riot shields, and no photographs allowed to be taken. So, the negative side is human rights abuses, genocide, and a visit is against what people say you should be boycotting this country. But a boycott doesn't really work. It hasn't worked in the last 15 years. It has a negative effect on workers, because if tourists don't come here and spend money, people who work in the tourism industry are unemployed. Now the plus sign is, the government still get revenue if you come as a tourist, but it's a mere fraction of what you spend as a tourist. Admittedly, it's VAT and taxes. More facilities are being built with tourists bringing in dollars. So that's good for the man who's holding the camera, because he works at this lodge. And money is spent in these game parks at these lodges to keep the water holes in good condition for the animals. The roads into the game reserves are maintained. And poaching patrols are paid to make sure they protect the elephants. So, the last thing is, the citizens want us to come to Zimbabwe. They want us to share in their plight, to know what's going on, to educate the visitor. And that's what makes tourism an education, is to learn about other countries. And I firmly hold the view that if I didn't go to South Africa, I would never have met Nelson Mandela during the end of apartheid era. So I do not agree with people saying don't go to a country if the politics don't suit you or they're unethical. Politics are unethical in every country to a degree, but here we are at Chirundu on the south bank of the river Zambezi, the fourth longest river in Africa, and it's a real picturesque, idyllic setting. But 4 people here are eaten every year on average because they bathe and they get eaten by crocodiles. So I'm not going to go into the river. I'm just enjoying life on the southern shore of the river Zambezi here in Zimbabwe. I recommend you to visit the country, forget the politics and meet the people.